Shalom, I'm David Benkof of Broadway Maven. I'm very pleased that we have almost our full complement of faculty today because Mateo is here as our music educator, and he'll be talking a little bit more about motives in Into the Woods. And we're also pleased to welcome back Gail Leondar-Wright, who will be talking to us later about wordplay in Into the Woods. And she has made it her mission to coordinate conversations about what makes Sondheim great. And I'm very pleased that she's chosen to include our class as part of that project. You're welcome to be back with us, and we'll do some interesting things, starting with the nugget of the show that to me lets me do everything that I do when I talk about Into the Woods. Let me show this to you.
No. Sorry. I tell the story, I'm not part of it.
That's right. Not one of us.
Always on the outside. Yeah, that's my job, don't you understand? There must always be someone on the outside.
You're going to be on the inside now.
You're making a big mistake.
Nonsense.
There must always be an outside observer to pass the story along.
Some of us don't like the way you've been telling it.
Okay, so this relates to a concept in literary theory called the death of the author, because it's the death of the narrator. And in death of the author philosophy or theory, it means that we are fully allowed to take a work of literature, film, drama, and bring our own interpretations to it. I'm gonna mute you, Mateo. Yeah, and bring our own interpretations to it and find in it what we want. That the author's intentions, and certainly the author's biography and psychology and religion and politics and all of those things don't matter. What matters is the work, the death of the author. So here, Sondheim kills the narrator. And to me, that gives me the permission to do whatever I want with Into the Woods and interpret it my way. And you're going to be seeing a lot of that. I've done it in the past, and in preparing for this this version of Teaching Into the Woods, I've done it many times, but this one, I came up with several new things that I'm excited to be sharing with you today, and here is one of them.
Look, Milky White, it's the butcher.
The baker.
The baker.
Okay, so that is a throwaway line. It's a funny little joke about how addle-headed Jack is, or is it? And I want to suggest that there's more going on in this scene. That when he says, oh, it's the butcher. Now remember that in the first act, he was leading Milky White to market to be killed. He was bringing Milky White to a butcher, and he died in the first act. He was brought back to life, but he did die. So on some level, is Jack saying, oh, look, it's the butcher? And it could be acted that way, but it doesn't have to be, because he could be using the word butcher in a subliminal or subconscious or not quite aware of what he's saying. After all, he's Jack. But he's using this word butcher that could relate to how you treat a cow. So there you go. Did Sondheim and Lapine put that in there on purpose? I don't know, but it's there because I found it.
Yes, the prince. He has charm for a prince, I guess. Guess? I don't meet a wide range.
Okay, now this is fun. Coming back to you. So the princess says she doesn't meet a wide range of princes. Okay, again, cute throwaway line, but it's much more sophisticated than that, in my opinion. So in her major song, On the Steps of the Palace, one of the main things in that song is pitch. That's the tar that she gets stuck in. And she later brings up the idea of pitch when they try to capture the giantess at the end of the show. And pitch, of course, is how high the notes are. And I was talking to Mateo about how pitch is an important concept to Cinderella. And he said, well, yeah, but also on the steps of the palace, steps are the difference in pitch from one note to the next. Okay, and then later I realized that Cinderella has even more steps because she's got stepsisters and a stepmother. So music is all over the way we talk about pitch, is all over the way we talk about Cinderella. And yet in her big song, On the Steps of the Palace, she doesn't have a wide range. She only sings an octave and a half, which is not a wide range. And then she sings, I don't meet a wide range. So this thing is just like so many different levels. And I don't care if Lapine and Sondheim don't agree with me. And if Sondheim would, go like this if he heard that I had argued it that way. I'm having fun, and Into the Woods allows me to do that. I really only get into it. You guys have seen me, many of you, teach cabaret this way. And when I teach Philip Roth, or when I look at the Torah, sometimes this is how I approach it. But I love to really get in there and see what we can find behind the text that we're looking at. Let's go back. Okay, so picture of Sondheim, because I want to remind you, that's to remind me to remind you that James Lapine is the co-author of Into the Woods, because he wrote the book. And it's very easy to say Sondheim wrote and Sondheim said and Sondheim did, and ignore the fact that he always gave credit to his co-authors, because they're his book writers, because they were very important in the designing and the execution of his shows. So forgive me, Mr. Lapine, when I say Sondheim, I really do mean Sondheim and Lapine most of the times that I say that. Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about a lot of things that Into the Woods might be about. And the first one is sort of the conventional, this is what Sondheim and Lapine say that Into the Woods is about. They say it's about community.
They're very much about the individual, and what happened in our production is the first act became very much about each of these individual quests, and the second act became more about this group as a community. So what we tried to do is play out the fairy tales as they were written, focusing mostly on each of their individual quests and their own transformations, Cinderella, Jack, even the baker and baker's wife. And then in the second act, find out what the consequences were of all of their actions in the first act.
Okay, so for what else Into the Woods is about, I'm now going to show you 5 little clips from the show that have something in common. And what I want you to do is put in the chat, especially if you can come up with one word, what is it that these 5 clips have in common that might be one of the things that the show is about?
My father's house was a nightmare. Your house was a dream. Now I wish for something in between.
And you think of all of the things you've seen, and you wish that you could live in between.
Must it all be either less or more, either plain or grand? Is it always or is it never and?
Isn't it nice to know a lot? And a little bit not.
So what are those having between, middle, wish, I wish, I want, either or, balance, wishing, wanting. Okay, in between, good, Mark. So those quotes is something that Into the Woods is about, which is about ambivalence. A lot of Sondheim is about ambivalence. You'll see that in a lot of his shows, but in this show in particular, you have all these songs. I just showed you moments from 5 songs where this less or more, you wish you could be somewhere in between, is part of what comes across in the show. So what else is Into the Woods about? Listen to this.
All the things you say, lived a fair young maiden, children will listen.
So we learn at the end of the show that children will listen.
Mother said straight ahead, not to delay or be misled. I should have heeded her advice, but he seems so nice. Okay, so, and yet at the beginning of the show, we learn about a child who doesn't listen. We learn about Little Red is saying, my mother told me to obey and I didn't do it. But the solution to that conundrum, which I didn't understand for a while, is at the end of the show, they sing, children may not obey, but children will listen. And what that raises is the question of what is Little Red learning? When she listens to her mother, right? She's not obeying, but she's listening. And what is she learning? And I think that might be revealed at the end when she says to Jack, I'll be your mother, right? So she's getting some maternal nature from her mother. She's listening even if she's not obeying. So let's watch. Into the Woods is about parenting. Now, this one is another one. I came up with this about a month ago, and I really think it works nicely in showing how Into the Woods is about parenting.
Go to the board and bring me back 1, the cow as white as milk.
Okay, so milk is the symbol of a mother nourishing her child.
2, the cape as red as blood.
We use the word blood when we talk about relatives.
3, the hair as yellow as corn.
Corn, food, is how a parent nourishes his or her child.
4, the slipper as pure as gold.
Gold is property. It's the things that need to be spent to take care of the child's well-being. So all 4 items that need to be found in the woods relate to parenting.
Mother isn't here now.
So only thing I wanted to bring up here with Mother Isn't Here Now. After I saw this show, I was reviewing it for my college newspaper, and I went back to the paper to write my review. And as I was writing it, I was singing na 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 na, and somebody said, "David, why are you singing Willy Wonka?" Because they thought I was doing dun da 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 da, sprinkle it with dew. So that was kind of funny.
So those of you who've studied with David before know that that Sondheim is a wordsmith, and you don't even actually need to study with David to realize that. It's so apparent. I want to, though, focus on wordplay and the meaning of wordplay in Into the Woods. But just to give a little introduction to the concept of wordplay, here's our friend Peter, that some of you have studied with here, who says some of what Sondheim has achieved with wordplay would be, for most lyricists, be harder than a matador coercionable, which of course Sondheim rhymes with personable in company. You may know that Sondheim has actually expressed some embarrassment over the lyrics that he wrote as a young man in West Side Story. He suggests that he was showing off when he had Maria talk so eloquently with such fun play of words in English, because that, of course, would not have been her native language. So he was particularly embarrassed by I Feel Pretty, where he used the word pretty again to describe a pretty wonderful boy. And he thought of that as being sort of ornament and something that a really sophisticated lyricist, the type he was going to grow into, would not do. They resist that. It's for pure entertainment. And this was very typical in musical theater before. Cole Porter and Ira Gershwin, they play with words as ornamentation. And Sondheim really felt that as he matured, he didn't want to do that anymore. He wanted to only do it when it expresses something about character or advances the plot. So I want to take a look at his next show, Gypsy, where he's got these homonyms, meanings, words that sound the same but mean something different. Now, Sondheim's only in his 20s here, and he's not only delighting in words at this point, though, he's using it to express the character of Rose, who uses language like the quick-witted, intelligent person that she is. Just one example from this very quick-witted character. Later on in Follies, he wrote another very quick-witted character. That's the character of Phyllis, highly intelligent with a barbed sense of humor. And here's an example of the way she uses wordplay. And again, I say she. I don't think of this as Sondheim using wordplay. I think of this as the character using wordplay. So let's listen to Could I Leave You, just a little bit, in which she's taunting her very rich husband with the threat of divorce. So it's not only just a fun play on words of the term leave me, but what she's actually doing here, I think, is she is saying to her husband, Ben, leave me, leave me, leave me, leave me, leave me. She's basically taunting him that he needs to be the one to initiate divorce. It's a play on words, but it actually has some meaning. So I love that a lot. The other thing that's really fun about the way Sondheim uses wordplay is sometimes he'll use words that are spelled differently but sound the same. And he thought that when you do that, when you use a pun that way, upon listening, the audience member would have to sort of perk up a bit because it hits your brain in a little fuzzy way or fizzy way. And that this brought an extra sort of excitement to the line. And so there's a couple of examples about this that are really fun. This is one from Assassins. So catch how it sounds the same, but it's spelled differently. And one early in his career, this is from A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. Catch that there's two puns, both numbers spelled differently, meaning different things. It's just brilliant songwriting, in my opinion. How do you get 1, 2 as, you know, into the sentence if you're not Stephen Sondheim? It's just beautiful. So all of this, of course, I want to bring this back to Into the Woods, which is awash in puns and wordplay, clever twists of phrase. This is Jack's mother, as you may recall, is frustrated because their aging cow, Milky White, is no longer producing milk. So what she's doing with this is she's trying to motivate Jack to hurry up and bring her to market while he still can sell her, because time's running out. So catch this. It is a triple homonym. There it is. Just beautiful, especially because one of them is 2 words. It's just gorgeous to me. And it's not only super fun and clever, but it really does kind of speak to the character of Jack's mother. Wouldn't have Cinderella, for example, saying these words. So here's a little bit. Somebody mentioned before class started that they love the 2 princes and their funny banter song. This is a reprise of Agony. And what's happening here is Cinderella's prince and Rapunzel's prince have each met another woman that they are lusting after. They're both unobtainable. And the wordplay here ends with a beautiful pun. Catch this. Wordplay on the thing that you could cry into your beer or cry on your beer. It delights me. It pleases me. So now I want to talk though about the meaning of all of this. And here's a little interview with James Lapine, of course, the librettist for Into the Woods. Whoops. There we go.
I think what I learned most from him is the marriage of music to spoken word. The one maybe major thing he said to me was, let me take care of theme. I can put things in a song that no one will blanch at, that you put in a scene and it will scream out as being thematic.
Right? So Sondheim likes to take care of the theme. He likes to put it in his lyrics. And in this case, he put the theme of the play, or at least one of them, into a beautiful, beautiful subliminal pun. So the baker's wife has just had a tryst with Cinderella's prince, and she's contemplating, as David had pointed out, must it all be this or that? And she's trying to think about, is it marriage, or is there a path that has more possibilities?
Must it all be either less or more, either plain or grand? Is it always or is it never? And that's what woods are for those moments in the wood.
So you may ask yourself, I don't see any wordplay. You're looking, you're reading the lyrics. Where is the wordplay? And it's because it's not there. It's invisible. So what I would like you to do now is to read this again to yourself, and I'll show you the section. And instead of reading WOODS, read WOULDS. Do you get the double meaning there? And Sondheim is quoted as saying, of course, what I wrote is WOODS, and that's what people hear. But I was hoping that I wrote it in such a way that people might also hear WOULDS at the same time. So to me, the song from which this woods pun occurs, to me, is the central message of the show. And people may disagree, you may disagree, but it works for me. So listen to this song again, to the song Moments in the Woods, just for fun. Thinking, every time you hear the word woods, thinking WOULDS. It's just kind of a mind-tingling pleasure to imagine that what the baker's wife is doing is questioning. Could it be this? Could it be that? What possibilities might I be open to? So here's the original baker's wife, Joanna Gleason. We're going to listen to the whole song, which is almost 3 minutes. Just keep that pun in mind and see if it's more fun for you or more interesting for you than if you didn't have that pun.
When I talk about woods, I use it as would that I could keep my cow, meaning I wish I could keep my cow. Right? Would that we would have a child. I wish we would have a child. So I connected to I wish. To me, it sounds like what you're saying is she's talking about and or what she wants. Would I do this? Would I do that? Is that what you're?
Yeah, woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Right.
Yeah.
So two very different ways of interpreting that word.
Yeah, and by the end of the song, she's made up her mind. She's going back to her husband. That it's time to leave the woods. It's time to stop this imagining what could have been. The and means more, the and being her husband, than it did before she had this experience.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's watch
Anne.
the homework video. Thank you, Gail. I really appreciate your presentation. I'm gonna show the homework video, which is about Freud and Sondheim, and then Mateo is going to go over the homework.
Which Sondheim musical is deeply influenced by Freudian ideas? It's not West Side Story, or Gypsy, or even Sweeney Todd. I'll Let It Slip, the 1987 fractured fairy tale mashup, Into the Woods. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. The show is so Freudian, it may as well have been written by Sigmund Sondheim. We'll analyze the show in a minute, but first a quick overview of Freud's work. Freud believed that the human mind contained three parts: the id, site of unconscious desires for sex, violence, and pleasure; the superego, which is basically the conscience; and the ego, which negotiates between the two to cope with life's demands. Freud's landmark, The Interpretation of Dreams, argued that the suppressed desires of the id often come up in dreams, fantasies, hallucinations, and wishes. Freud argued children are sexual beings, and if it looks like a penis, it's a penis, which he called a phallic symbol. The Broadway Maven offers a free online class every Monday at noon. Visit thebroadwaymaven.com for details. Into the Woods subverts our usual understanding of fairy tales with its first few notes. Here's Sondheim.
Once upon a time. And as soon as an audience hears that, they start to relax inside because they think it's going to be once upon a time, there was a little girl. Once upon a time, there was. And what I wanted to do was wake them up right away. So the narrator starts, and before he gets into the fifth word, I want a very loud sound from the orchestra or the piano, whatever it is. So it is, once upon a time. And just at that point, the entire audience, I hope, will be startled into having to listen.
The show starts with each character's deepest desires. Cinderella wants to go to the ball, Jack wants to save his beloved cow, and a baker and his wife wish to have a child. The woods represent the id. That's where we see sex, adultery, and even pedophiliac bestiality. It's where we see violence, including child abuse, rape, mutilation, and murder. Each character lives on the edge of the forest, the boundary between chaos and civilization. In order to get what they wish for, they must go into the woods. You can't miss some of the Freudian...
That is my, it's not mine. That's the pun that I appreciate about woods and woods that Sondheim has acknowledged is there. I've also noticed one that I have not seen anybody else mention, but that is the first word of the show is once. And in many accents, that's precisely the same, certainly in mine and in Sondheim's, as the way you pronounce once, W-A-N-T-S. So this is a show about wishes, and the first word sounds like the word once.
Themes, from the phallic beanstalk and Rapunzel's tower to Little Red Riding Hood's sexual awakening after being seduced and eaten by the wolf.
Feel excited, well, excited and scared.
And the ambivalence that comes with it.
Isn't it nice to know a lot and a little bit not?
The baker's wife has a tryst with Cinderella's prince, which he justifies in Freudian terms.
Anything can happen in the woods. Right and wrong don't matter in the woods. Only feelings.
But the baker's wife's superego takes over.
Back to life, back to sense, back to child, back to husband. No one lives in the woods. There are vows, there are ties, there are needs, there are standards, there are shouldn'ts and shoulds.
Now, Sondheim claimed the musical did not represent Freud's ideas, but rather those of Freud's colleague Carl Jung, with every character and archetype. I disagree. Compare the lyrics from the end of the first act with those at the end of the second act. It goes from you mustn't ponder, you have to act, the id, to you can't just act, you have to listen and think. So the moral of the story is your ego has to cope with life and not let the id take over.
Though it's fearful, though it's deep, though it's darker than you may lose the path where you may not force. But think you can't just act, you have to will.
How dare I claim to know more about Sondheim's intentions than Sondheim? I'll tell you why. A giant of 20th century thought said we often have no access to our own motivations for doing things. So Sondheim may have written a Freudian show without knowing it. And who was that giant? Sigmund Freud.
Okay, so turning off the share and spotlighting Mateo. Or actually, yeah, go ahead, Mateo, you can do that while Gail and I are watching you. Go for it.
This is very fun. The homework question was, can you think of other musicals that have Freudian undertones? So here are some of the ideas that we got. Melanie Lee says, for some reason, Little Shop of Horrors popped into my mind, and I thought at first that my mind was confusing Freudian with Faustian. However, perhaps the plant Audrey 2, who has a female name and a male voice usually, could be seen as a huge vagina with teeth. So there you go. Thanks, Melody, for that image. Catherine Davis says, West Side Story also had some Freudian themes. If it's a knife that pierces or a gun with a barrel, it's also a penis. If it's a dark alley or a dark room with a small bed, the fire escape, hiding like inside a tunnel or womb, is also Freudian. Right and wrong don't matter in the woods, and also when you're Maria in love, you were in love or so you said, you should know better, I love him, we're one, there's nothing to be done. Right or wrong, love is the absolute negotiating between id and superego. And Sharon Rosbicki says, I'm not a Freudian, never believed that penis envy thing. But anyway, most fairy tales have sexual undertones, so Into the Woods carries on that tradition.
Thank you. Next thing I want to talk about is, or next thing I want to do is show people what's coming up in the class. So I'm going to share the screen and do that.
The Broadway Maven is the only free weekly Broadway appreciation course you'll find online. Every week we look at topics as diverse as A Chorus Line, West Side Story, and Gershwin on Broadway. Here's what's new for the week of August 29th. Little Shop of Horrors, September 1st, and a free class on Anything Goes, September 11th and 12th. On September 15th, The Wizard of Oz. Students in the Greater Toronto Area are invited to join David and Mateo on Sunday, September 4th for a get-together. Upcoming all-access pass exclusives include a watch party and class on The Rocky Horror Show and a guest speaker on Grease. My weekly blast comes out every Thursday. For just $36 a year, you get my interpretations of Broadway, my rants, my raves, my YouTube gems, and more. And then there's my YouTube channel. Recent videos are on topics like Broadway's symbolic names, the A Chorus Line dancers, canceling Rent, Broadway's deadly sins, and 10-minute versions of 4 Rodgers and Hammerstein shows. You can find links to all upcoming classes, plus information on my other projects at thebroadwaymaven.com.
Next thing I want to talk to you about is, the next theme I want to talk to you about is time in Into the Woods. And this is something I've been working on for a long time, and I can't yet make a very strong argument about what's going on in the show about time, but there's a lot that's there. And I think the argument is that time is not only linear. And just to give you some examples, just out of the song that we just looked at, if life were made of moments, then you'd never know you'd had one. So the idea that if we make life a straight line with one moment after the other, then where goes character? And by the way, the stars of the show are all characters from literature, right? Characters from fairy tales. So there's a lot going on. The concept of the last midnight, remember they had to find the objects in 3 days time, and then we had the first midnight and the second midnight. But then at the end of the show, after they've already had all the objects a long time ago, they have this song called The Last Midnight. I think, Mateo, yesterday you were talking about how that's probably the last midnight in the world. And that raises the question of what goes on at the end of the show when they say happily ever after. That's the typical trajectory of a fairy tale, is once upon a time, la 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 la, or once upon a time there was a la 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 la, and they live happily ever after, but it doesn't end there. Usually in fairy tales, and they lived happily ever after, full stop, the end. And we don't have that in Into the Woods. We have, and happily ever after, I wish. So the world is a circle, and narrative becomes a circle as opposed to having a trajectory. So that is something to think about regarding Into the Woods and time. Next, I want to talk about the antagonist and the protagonist of the show. So first, I want to ask you who the antagonist is. That's sort of the villain, or the character that would be, that's probably the best way of describing it. I'm going to not give you a share screen. I'm going to give you a poll. I'm going to ask you to tell me who's the main antagonist in Into the Woods. The witch, the wolf, the prince's steward, the mysterious man, the giantess, Cinderella's stepmother, and other, specify in chat. So a few of you have voted, a lot of you have not. Let's give it 5 more seconds. And most of you put the witch. A couple of you who are regular students in the class got it right. And the answer is Jack. Jack is the antagonist of this show. And we know that because he's the one who puts all the negative stuff in motion. It's his greed, and it's his single-minded devotion to stealing stuff that ends up with all the negative consequences that we have in the second act. So I will argue that Jack is the antagonist of the show. Now, who is the protagonist of the show? The way that we measure that is who is the person that changes, or who's the person that changes the most. And rather than spend any time on asking you what you think, we'll find out what the creators of the show think.
Meaning the baker and Cinderella, because Cinderella, though she isn't physically that much older than she was in the first act, has changed from a girl to a woman. She is, in fact, in one way, I suppose, the character in the play who changes the most. And she becomes responsible in the second act as a woman for a girl, namely Little Red Riding Hood.
Okay, so I'm going to pass along the teaching baton to Mateo, who's going to talk to us about motives in Into the Woods.
Hello, everybody. Yes, motives, which is an interesting word because it means like the thing that motivates you to do something as a character. So you could say that the character's wishes and wants in the show are their motives. But that's not the context I'm talking about motives. I'm talking about motives in the sense of motif or leitmotif, which is a term used in classical music that was popularized by Richard Wagner. And the idea is in any sort of work of poetry or play or theater or film or anything, a motive or a motif is anything that repeats a lot and has significance to, you know, the themes of whatever piece of art you're witnessing. So for example, if there's an image that repeats a lot, or a word that repeats a lot, or a musical sound that repeats a lot, and we'll talk about that, or like a dance move that repeats a lot in the choreography, those are all examples of different kinds of motif. And so in Into the Woods, we have a motif that is the image of the woods, right, and what that represents. Then we have an image, a motif that is the words in between, or the words or the word and the word I wish, right? These are motifs that keep coming back. Then we have the motif of like the walking in a circle, right? They're always walking in a circle, the characters, in the original Broadway production at least, as they're talking about the lessons that they've learned, and as they're doing the midnight sequences where they all talk about the morals. So there are a lot of different kinds of motifs. I'm going to talk about all of the, or the two most prominent musical motifs in the show. The first one, those 5 notes are arguably the 5 notes that the whole score of the show is based around. And it's called the Bean Motif, because whenever the beans get passed from one character to another, specifically with the baker giving the beans to Jack in exchange for the cow, we hear. And so each one of those 5 notes is a bean. It's all over the show. It's under the witch's wrap, we hear. Right? Same 5 notes. It's also Rapunzel's theme, the theme that Rapunzel is singing. Rapunzel always sings that from the tower. So the bean motif is everywhere in this show. And it represents, yes, the idea of the beans. Whenever Jack sings about going up the beanstalk, he sings to this melody. All the characters sing it at some point in some way, because it's all about the beans, which are kind of the center of the plot. These magic beans that set everything in motion. The baker's father steals them from the witch, and that sets the curse in motion. Then Jack takes them and throws them into the ground, and that sets the whole giant thing in motion. So they're very, very important to the plot, and so the music that represents them is very, very important to the score. Oops. There we go. Now there's another motif that keeps coming back, and this one I call it the learning motif. And like Michael was saying in the comments earlier, all of these characters learn a lesson, right? And it's all about fairy tales. Fairy tales very it's very well known that fairy tales tend to have a moral or a lesson that the characters learn that then the people who are listening to the story can learn as well. And so there's a little musical language that Sondheim uses to let us know, hold up everybody, this character's learning something. This character's figuring something out. And it comes in 4 of the big solos for 4 of the main characters. We have Little Red, Jack, Cinderella, and the baker's wife. And each of these 4 big songs, I Know Things Now, Giants in the Sky, On the Steps of the Palace, and Moments in the Woods, are 4 of the big solos in the show. And they're all constructed very, very simply like a puzzle. Like a puzzle. You take the learning motif, and then you take whatever character's learning something, and you put their like musical motif on top, and you write a song based on that. And it makes 4 unique songs just by mixing and matching motifs. It's really cool. I'm gonna show you what I mean. So this is how the learning motif sounds. So the main thing I want you to focus on listening for is this upward moving part here. Do you hear those notes? And these are the last 4 notes of the major scale. Sol, la, ti, do. So they're leading us to do. They're leading us to that last note of the major scale, which feels resolved, which feels final. So they're leading us to a conclusion, right? And the characters are coming to a conclusion, so is the music. That's how it leads us there. So that is underneath I Know Things Now. And I know things now, many valuable things that I hadn't known before. Right? And then, so that's what the piano's doing. Now listen to the melody. And I know things now, many valuable things. And I know things now. Right? That's Little Red's Little Red song. Sounds like that. And that's Little Red's motif. Because it comes in the same way in the opening number. I wish it's not for me, it's for my granny in the woods, please. And I know things now. The exact same two notes that Little Red sings before. So we have this learning motif plus the two notes that Little Red sang in the opening number. So we have learning motif plus Little Red motif equals Little Red is learning something. And that's how the song is made. And it's the exact same for all the other three songs. Look at Giants in the Sky, for example. When you're way up high and you look below at the world you've left and the things you know, little more than a glance is enough to show you just how small you are. Learning motif, listen to this. Sounds familiar? He's coming to the conclusion, it's the exact same music, plus on top, he's not singing he's not singing Little Red's melody, he's singing his own melody. When you're way up high and you look below at the world you've left. Where have we heard those notes before? It's the beans! So Jack goes up the beanstalk, here's the bean theme, and he learns a lesson, here's the learning theme. There we go, that's Giants in the Sky. It's just beanstalk plus lesson. Jack goes up the beanstalk, learns a lesson, and then that's the song. It's brilliant. So, on the steps of the palace, exact same thing. Cinderella's just been to the ball, so it sounds different. Instead of this really rhythmic march, instead of that rhythmic march, we get a waltz because she's just coming from a ball. But listen to the music. It's the same. I could play it in a march and it would sound like this. But it's just in a waltz instead. But it's got that upward motion that leads us to the conclusion. So it's the learning motif plus the waltz from the ball. So Cinderella goes to the ball and learns a lesson. That's on the steps of the palace. It's so simple. It's just this plus this equals the song. And it's the exact same for Moments in the Woods, too. The baker's wife, her first mini solo at the beginning of the first act, she sings Maybe They're Magic, and she sings, if you find what you want, then you go, and if you know what you want, then you go, and you find it, and you get it. Something like that. Something like that. That's what she's singing. That's the baker's wife's little, I'm figuring things out melody. So Moments in the Woods, and what's interesting about Moments in the Woods, and I won't go too much into this because it's pretty complicated, but we actually get to see the learning motif get built up bit by bit by bit while she's learning the lesson in real time. So I have a whole video about that on my YouTube channel, so you can watch that after the class if you're interested in that. But we basically, for Moments in the Woods, have the learning motif plus the baker's wife's motif again. Back to life, back to sense, back to child, back to husband, no one lives in the woods, right? Back to life, back to sense, back to child, back to husband. If you know what you want, then you go and you find it. Exact same melody, plus learning motif. So we have baker's wife, baker's wife, baker's wife, learns a lesson. And that's how the four big solos for the four main characters in the show are constructed. It's like a puzzle. And Sondheim very famously is like a puzzle master, and he loved his Sudokus and his crossword puzzles. And so this is a little bit like, it shows in his score. He takes his motifs, right? And he said this in interviews. when you start writing a score, all you do is you just make a few little motifs for the important themes in the show, and then you just mix and match them. And that's how Sondheim writes his brilliant scores. He sat down for Into the Woods. He went, okay, I'm going to do a bean motif. That sounds like 5 beans, 5 notes for 5 beans. And then when they learn something, there's going to be this melody that leads to a conclusion, and then each one of the characters is going to have their own little motif, and then we'll just mix and match them depending on what themes are important in each scene in the show. And that's how not just these 4 solos, but the whole show is constructed. It's pretty wild. All right, back to you, David.
Thanks, Mateo. I have a question, which is, did Sondheim refer to it as the learning motive, or is that you? Is that how it's generally called?
I don't know. I don't know if he did. I call it the learning motif or the lesson motif. I'm sure he has a name for it somewhere. The bean motif is the one that he has talked about a lot. So the bean motif is the like official name for it. But I don't know that the learning motif has an official name.
Okay. So I am going to go to gallery view because I want to be able to see hands, because I'm going to open up for comments. I'm going to give you a couple of questions you're welcome to answer, or you can share your own commentary analysis, your own thoughts. If you have memories, please keep them under 30 seconds because we just got lots of people who have things to say. But the questions I want to give you are: 1, do Sondheim and Lapine respect the fairy tales, or are they parodying them? Respecting or parodying? And the second question is, why do you think that they used existing fairy tales? There was a time that they were going to invent all of their tales, and instead they only invented one. And why do you think they did that, and why do you think it's important? Or maybe it was a mistake. So those are some of the questions I'm giving to you. The session is being recorded, so don't raise your hand if you don't want to be broadcast. But we're looking for thoughts and comments, and here's EJ. Hi, EJ.
I think it made sense for them to use fairy tales that we were familiar with, that most people know, because then you can focus on the other themes of the show and not be concentrating on learning about these characters.
Right. Although, you know, that Little Red Riding Hood has a sweet tooth, we had to learn that. I mean, there's a lot of things that...
Right, but the basic underlying story is still, she's going into the woods to her grandmother's house and beware of the wolf. I mean, we all know that story.
Right, and so when the wolf comes on stage, we know to be nervous, we know what's going to happen, and we know what grandmother is and all those things. I think that's a good point. Thank you for that, EJ. So let me take Randy. Hi, Randy. Hi, Randy. Yeah.
Hi. Why is it either or? Why can't it be parody? Yeah, why is it either or? Why can't it be parody and respect both?
What do you think?
Fits with the theme of the show.
Right. Either or, a little bit of each. I think that makes sense. So Gail, I'm going to spotlight you again. And, you know, you're so smart about Sondheim. Is there anything that Mateo said or that I said that you'd like to respond to?
No, but I want to reiterate that people should look at Mateo's videos. For me, and I don't read music well, I have to see things several times, but there's a great deal of pleasure to be derived there. I also wanted to mention that somebody in the chat, I think it was Luke, had referenced a video that he had seen, an interview with Sondheim, in which he talks about how he builds a score by taking one piece here and turning upside down, and it's a new song. You take a bit of a song here, you combine it with this one, it's a new song. And he joked on himself about how, well, that's because you don't have to do a whole lot of work.
Saves you a lot of work. Yeah, I know this. I know this.
I wish I could remember who had interviewed him on this. It's a very famous interview, but it's worth looking for it.
And that's all about the development of motifs, right? Like, you have the characters, like the bean motif. If it appears in different contexts, it sounds different, right? Like when the witch is singing, it doesn't sound lovely, and right? The witch is mad and she's doing her rap, and we hear this weird, disgusting chord underneath, and she goes, right? The rhythm is different. Like it's a way of, and then if you flip that upside down, oh, this is actually really cool. Because you said flipping it upside down?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Da 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 da.
Na 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 na. Right? If you flip that upside down, people make mistakes. Mothers.
Yep.
People make mistakes. So it's the upside down of the Bean motif in No One Is Alone.
Yeah, I was just reading something, Mateo, that's great. I just read something right before class that there's a quote, I think it was a New Yorker article, in which he said he sometimes will put things upside down to show this is the exact opposite of that. You know, which of course is how subliminally we must receive it. It's really pretty amazing.
Isn't that in Sweeney Todd a lot, where he inverts things?
You get the DS area upside down sometimes.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
So I want to just let you know a little bit of what people are saying in the comments. Kevin is endorsing the current Broadway production. Did you like it, Gail?
I liked it. I liked it. The hype to me kind of ruined it, but I was also honestly, and I'm going to sound so old and curmudgeonly, but my experience was really diminished by the hordes of people screaming.
Oh.
That for every entrance of a character, there'd be sustained applause and screaming for a minute. And at the end of every song, and part of it was that some of those people were unmasked, which was upsetting, but also it was more like a rock concert than a show. And that I had a hard time staying with the vibe because of the audience. And I've talked to lots of people, and that happens every performance.
Right.
That's
very
interesting.
About Linda has her hand up, David. I don't know if you noticed that.
Sure. Well, we only have 45 seconds left, and I like at the end. Sorry, Linda. I like at the end to read what some of the people are saying. Elaine says, "Thanks again for a great show. I've learned so much about Sondheim and Into the Woods. So excited for David and Mateo to meet next weekend. I wish I could be there. Maybe take pictures to share." We have Terry says, "Terrific class again. So much to think about here. Thank you, Mateo and Gail, as well as David." Then Nancy says, "Fantastic class. Thank you, David." Marianne says, "Wonderful class. Everyone was great." Awesome class, says Maxine. "Seems to have gone over well. Fascinating. Thanks," says Jan Linda. So it's always a pleasure to have you here, Gail and Mateo. Great again. Mateo and I are going to be meeting after class, so I'm going to ask you to leave. So thank you for coming, and I'm going to turn the recording off. And bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much. This was a pleasure.
Thanks, Gail. We'll be in touch.
Sure. Bye-bye.